If I were to list all of Bruce Helander's accolades and accomplishments, we would all have to check into the colony for 3 weeks, because that's how long it would take. So I will just mention a few highlights. Called the most famous collage artist in the United States, Bruce's works are in over 50 museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, and the Guggenheim. And he has been the subject of hundreds of publications. After obtaining a master's degree at the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design, Bruce later became its provost and vice president of academic affairs. A former White House fellow of the National Endowment for the Arts, Bruce also won the South Florida Cultural Consortium Fellowship for professional achievement in the visual arts. And in 2014, along with singer-songwriter Tom Petty, Bruce was inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame. Not bad. But Bruce's expertise and creativity exceed more than one category. Along with being a consummate artist and ubiquitous exhibitor, Bruce is an arts author, critic, curator, editor, and interviewer. Luckily for all of us, Bruce moved to Palm Beach in 1982. So it is my honor to introduce our very own resident raconteur, genius, and Renaissance man, Bruce Helander.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Oh, my goodness. Well, what a pleasure to be here, Deborah, and thank you very much. I was familiar with Deborah's writing for many years before I actually had the chance to meet her. Deborah Pollack is an amazing resource for this community, a gifted writer and a scholar, and knows more about art history than I think anyone else in this town. And she, I used to live on Root Trail, and I said, I think I was the only artist in the Artist Hall of Fame, and she knew right away it was Woodward who had won the other award in Root Trail. So she's been all over the place, and she has a keen eye, and I was delighted to accept the invitation to speak this evening about my life and career. I hope that you enjoy it. The colony means a lot to me, and it means a lot to Palm Beach. When I first came here in 1982, I opened a gallery at 125 Worth Avenue. That's the first commercial space on the avenue, and I thought it was just great, and the rent wasn't that bad. And at the end of the day, all the young art dealers, including myself, would come down to the colony, and it had the most interesting bar at the end of the day, and you'd trade war stories and something or other. The only other option was the colony, but this was the one that had the intimacy, and everybody would say hello. It sounded like almost like a TV show. And also, this has been the hotel of record. This is the hotel that a lot of celebrities prefer. Every single time Andy Warhol came to town, usually to see Baby Jane Holzer, he preferred to stay here. He liked the elegance, he liked the old world charm, and this colony is quite an institution. So it's a pleasure having the opportunity to speak here, having lived and worked in this community for probably 35 years. After 4 years at 125 Worth Avenue, I kind of said goodbye to the colony, because when they say in real estate, location is everything, and it'd be like a Thanksgiving week, and that's the best retail week of the year. And I'd stand out on 125 Worth Avenue, I'd look down, and there'd be like a riot going on with money up in the air and so on, and my little gallery was quiet. So we swallowed hard and paid more rent and left for 210 Worth Avenue, where our sales quadrupled in the first Saturday. So location. Yeah.
So tell us, Bruce.
Uh-oh.
When did you first fall in love with the visual arts?
Well, I fell in love with the visual arts very early in my life. I always had a creative streak. I was always interested in creating things. I was interested in drawing as a young kid, 3 years old. I would be at my mother's footsteps, and when she would sew, I would try to learn to sew. I liked that creative process. I was interested in the clouds and the landscape and everything else that had to do with creativity. But I had a huge struggle, like most male artists in junior high school and in high school, remarkably dyslexic.
But you excelled in baseball.
I excelled in baseball. Yeah, and that's why I'm there. I had such a difficult time, and my mother said I crawled backwards. And my mother she said, now, and this is the way you spell time, and, the small hand is on the 10 and over to here, and I'd say, 10 o'clock. She said, no, it's 10 minutes of, you get, all right, and my mother would say, take a right, and she'd take a left. I'd still probably go right anyway. So I found that life was kind of challenging and a little bit scary, and I was in the Midwest. I was born in Great Bend, Kansas, the actual geographic center of the continental United States. And that's about it.
And what did your mother tell your father about your problems with dyslexia?
Well,
and your creativity?
Oh, that's funny. Well, I like different sorts of things. I wasn't the typical kid, my mother said, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, I was 9 years old, I think. And I said, I want a dollhouse. She said, let me get back to you. I'm going to talk to your dad. She came back, and he said, are you sure you don't want a fire truck? I said, no, I want the dollhouse. And what do you want to do with it, Brucey? I said, well, I want to decorate it. And I want to make my own furniture, and I do the thing. And she said, if that's what you want, that's what you get. But I'll just check with Dad one more time. Fortunately, I had such supportive parents, and they knew that I had learning disabilities. There's nothing you can do about it. And when I went to high school, the word dyslexia wasn't even coined. It gave me a great deal of security when I finally found myself getting into Rhode Island School of Design and finding out that the majority of male artists were all dyslexic.
So you decided to become an artist and an illustrator.
Exactly. I thought, I thought I'd be a baseball player because I had great aim and I could throw the ball fast and I ran fast, and I figured, hey, that's a sure bet. Maybe I can make a living that way. But I had, wasn't the kind of person where, I could become a mathematician or an accountant or a lawyer or anything to do with money. That wasn't going to work. So I said, after going to the Chandler baseball camp in Chandler, Oklahoma is okay.
So when you became an artist and illustrator, your work was published, wasn't
Yes,
it?
well, I found, it's kind of funny. In a doctor's office, I found a copy of the New Yorker magazine when I was in Minnesota. That's where I graduated from high school, and I looked at this magazine and said, man, this is what I want to do. I want to be an illustrator. I'd like to illustrate things that I see. It wouldn't be interesting that you could actually get paid for having fun. So I would draw these things, and I would keep thinking about the New Yorker, and decided when I got into Rhode Island School of Design, it was a toss-up between being a painter and an illustrator, and I said, I want to be an illustrator, and I want to get something published in the New Yorker, which of course is the finest publication printed in America, maybe the world for that matter. So it was a real goal, because not only do they hire famous artists and great illustrators, but they have the greatest writing in the New Yorker that money can buy. So it's just a week without the New Yorker for me is really difficult. So I think this was my first, was commissioned by the New Yorker to do, in 1993 I think it was, called Time Traveler, and it was the last illustration of the new year. And when I just couldn't wait to get to that newsstand and open this up, and I said, is there another page on that? Yeah, I said, my goodness, that's pretty much the whole page of the New Yorker. I thought it was just great. What's going on? And so it was interesting. I was down here, and they liked the work. And if they had something that they were interested in, they would call on a Monday, and it had to be in New York, Federal Express, by Thursday morning.
Amazing.
So I learned to hustle right along and do, try to make money with my art, which isn't always easy. 95% of all artists in America are unemployed. It's only 5% of artists that actually make it at all. It's very difficult. Those who can't make it in illustration or painting or find a niche or join Gagosian or whatever become teachers or educators or start their own businesses or galleries or stuff like that. So I feel very, very fortunate that I had a goal that I wanted to go to the best art school I could possibly get into, and RISD is certainly considered #1.
Yes.
But I also wanted to have, coming from the Midwest, I wanted to be with motivated, talented, ambitious artists and designers, which at the end of the day, every famous artist that I know, prominent artist, had these common denominators of ambition and hard drive, and certainly working 7 days a week, which is what I still do.
And speaking of artists, who were the artists who influenced you most of all?
Well, my 4 favorite artists, I guess, I think the greatest artist of all time, another poor dyslexic, was Leonardo da Vinci. And he enjoyed writing backwards because we use a mirror, and it made more sense to him. Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles play a mean piano because they can't see. So their ears are sharper. So I learned at RISD that all of the artists were, had the same kinds of problems, the same kind of dyslexia, but you lean toward the creative areas when you don't have the other facilities that everybody else takes for granted, and that's why so many artists, Rauschenberg is dyslexic and whatever. The next person in line for me would be Picasso. He can do no wrong. Why is Picasso interesting? Well, he was the one who invented abstraction. Before him, everything had to be basically realistic, and he and his pal George Braque, invented collage one day in 1913, where they started laying down paper, and it was so remarkable, so revolutionary, that people thought they were just absolutely crazy. But the best art always has the most amazing reaction, okay? The next person in line, my favorite person who ever walked the face of the earth in terms of art, is hands down, is William de Kooning, the greatest abstract expressionist artist that ever lived, the father of abstract expressionism. And by the way, abstract expressionism is the hardest art form to paint, to make successful, and to work. The last is Andy Warhol. I'm a fan of the great masterpieces that he made. Warhol did so much work that a lot of it really wasn't that good. He did have some bombs, but it doesn't really matter what it is any longer. When you become an icon like Andy Warhol, people start to see that he found something different in art, that he could literally put his hand on a tomato soup can and make art out of it, same way. Jasper Johns, by the way, when Ivan Karp, or I think it was Leo Castelli, said, Jasper Johns can make he could make art out of 2 beer cans. And in fact, that's exactly what he did, the 2 bronze beer cans, whatever. What's next?
What about Hannah Hoch?
Oh, Hannah Hoch is my favorite artist for any number of reasons. She was a German artist in 1920 and 1930, started fooling around with collage and ended up making collage. Are there things going on behind me? Yes, I guess. Okay. So anyway, so I liked her because it was simplicity, the idea that she could take adaptively reusing materials. That's why I like collage, because collage is an appropriation activity. You're finding something that you like, and then you're altering it in a certain way that's recognizable. You're twisting it around, and you're throwing it out to make something new and something interesting that still has little bits and pieces of appropriated material. So Hannah Hoch did the same kind of thing, where she would find old magazines and put it together. I loved her and Paul Klee. I named my first daughter Klee, K-L-E-E, after Paul Klee, before we knew it was a boy or a girl. So that was pretty special. Paul Klee, another great artist. Yeah.
You mentioned Andy Warhol. Tell us about the day you met him.
Well, after resigning from Rhode Island School of Design as the provost, actually 2 more years I took this position, vice president for student affairs. And I got an idea for a magazine. It was called Art Express. And I always had this idea. I mean, and as you know, I published the Art Economist, short-lived but celebrated a few years ago. I love the idea of investigating art and writing about art, so we started this magazine called Art Express. The designer was Malcolm Greer, who was the designer for the Guggenheim. It had a great launch, and I wondered how one launches a magazine, and I started reading all these news articles, and if you go to the Palladium in those days, there'd be Andy Warhol with a magic marker and his pencil and in his pocket, and all of these interview magazines. And he would sign them and hand them out, but there'd always be a subscription card. He was an entrepreneur. So I said, you know, what the heck, you know. So I would go back between Providence, and where my home was, and I'd stayed in the West Village, and in the morning I'd get up and I'd go to places like 420 West Broadway. I'd stand out and pitch Art Express with lots of fold-out, you know, subscription cards. So I was walking in front of FAO Schwartz, this is absolute true story, and the guy, Andy, is on the corner of FAO Schwartz, 5th Avenue, handing out his magazine. And I had my magazine, introduced myself. I had met him briefly at Rhode Island School of Design when he was doing a show called Raid the Icebox, one of the most extraordinary historic shows ever done in a museum, especially Rhode Island School of Design. And so I said, well, would you sign my magazine cover? This was the anniversary issue where we had a national competition on the best literal outside architecture, and this was a structure of 2 guys that built this building in Maine, and they sold watermelon. And so I love that. You know, I like the car wash where it's the big whale and you drive in the whale's head, you know, or all those, you know, like the Shell station made out of a scallop shell. The milk bottle in the Hamptons that sells milkshakes and stuff. Love that kind of literal kind of stuff. And that's what an illustrator goes for. How are we doing?
We're doing fine.
Okay, so we're doing fine.
So you met Andy Warhol in New York City.
I met Andy Warhol in New York City. Yeah, and he said he'd run out of magazines, and he said, well, I'm going to go home. He said, would you like to walk home with me? And I went, I'm going to walk with Andy Warhol. I couldn't believe it. And close up, you just really couldn't believe how challenging this man's skin was. It was, and he always had problems with his hair, so he would have, instead of just getting a regular kind of wig, he'd get the wig that everybody would know was a wig, but it was a fright wig. And when this man's walking down 5th Avenue, and cabs pull over, people jump out, they're taking pictures. One of my great regrets is, there was no such thing as an iPhone there. I would have been taking pictures and selfies. And, I'm walking along, and I just remember that. And I also knew that no one ever got into his place. So as we walked up, and he knocked on the door, one of his 2 Filipino housekeepers opened the door. He says, "It's very nice meeting you." I knew I didn't have a prayer, but I just was kind of like looking in the thing there. So that was a great motivation. But artists or musicians, everybody needs motivation, and everybody wants to connect with the real thing. And that's how I became interested in interviewing famous artists, people who were articulate, people had a message, people that maybe didn't necessarily share my political viewpoints, but in terms of viewpoints of aesthetic merit and invention and things that you could really get your teeth into, that's what I was after. So I was in New York all the time. I'd go to every opening I could. Henry Gedzeller once told me, he says, well, Andy Warhol, he'd go to the opening of a drawer if he wanted to. Andy was out every single night, 7 days a week, asked to host Saturday night. The other Mouseketeers, if you look closely, some of these people have little ears on them. So that's one of my favorite paintings. Then I got another picture called Triple Elvis, which is really very funny. Andy Warhol did a series, of course, of celebrities, and he loved celebrities, and that's why he got into it. That's why he started his magazine, by the way. Interview, he says, well, I can get celebrities, we'll take their pictures, and then they'll buy the portrait. And that's exactly what they did.
Very clever.
So I did an appropriation of Elvis's Triple Elvis, and I put my own face in it. So when you see it, it looks like you go, wait a minute, is that Bruce? So, Elvis should have been singing forever, but has never acted for 1 minute, that was not a good idea, Elvis. Why did you do that? That was a no-no.
What about Eye on New Jersey?
Oh, Eye on Jersey. It's behind us. This was, the New Yorker asked me for a cover idea, and my wife Claudia and I decided to do this iconic cover information on the New Yorker. In 1934, the New Yorker's holding a little, he's holding his little spectacle, and he's looking at a butterfly, and the average New Yorker say, what is this? I mean, what? So the average New Yorker wouldn't know what nature is. So every year there's a spoof, and this spoof is called Eye on Jersey, where the guy is holding his little monocle, but it's not a butterfly, it's the island of Jersey, which is what a New Yorker might think New Jersey would look like. I like it because anything that I did that was published, I did the film festival posters for 10 years. I love the fact that when you make something, you can see it published, you can see it in a magazine. Mm-hmm. So those are among my favorite things.
Okay, well, I have one.
You do?
Last month marked the 10th anniversary of the Bernie Madoff scandal. I know. And one of your famous works is Bars and Stripes Forever, the Bernie Madoff dartboard. And I read that you made a limited edition of prints of this work and sold them, with darts sold separately, of course. And then you donated a portion of the proceeds to Autism Speaks. Yeah. Can you share your thoughts on this iconic?
I was, the Palm Beach community was, especially the cultural community and the philanthropic community, was devastated. I had very good friends and major collectors from Providence who had, several $100 million in with Mr. Madoff, and he used to have his own little locker in the Palm Beach Country Club, and there were people who would say, can you get me an introduction to Mr. Madoff? Mm-hmm. So really, what he did was he was targeting an audience and didn't care if it was their last dime. And so in this case, targeting an audience, the metaphor was, of course, the dartboard, where he's the center of the target, but he's behind bars. And then in the corner here is a little thing from Monopoly Go to Jail. I've forgotten all of these things. And so basically, he targeted other people, and he made a game out of it, and then he became the target.
Right.
And one of the things down here, one of the options is prison, and that's where he belonged. So
sure is.
I don't do a lot of political work. I mean, Warhol did political work. Picasso did political work. All of them had great political convictions, but this is really sort of the closest thing.
Yes. Now, your book, Learning to See, is very useful in educating us about contemporary art. In general, how did you select the artists featured in that book?
Well, thank you. Well, this is the book right here. It took 3 years to make, and when I started to be curious, and you got to realize, I couldn't write in high school, I couldn't write in grade school, I could barely get through. I ended up being the dean of a college where I still had problems. The only reason I became a writer is that I had a dictation secretary, and the senior secretary for the provost's office says, just talk in the little black box. And that's what I did for 3 years. And then I ended up learning how to write that way. Isn't it funny? You just sort of talk, and then you construct the sentences and so on. So I became very, very curious about other artists, and this was sort of like a new deal. It's like all of a sudden you've learned to whistle or something. So I would like to look at artists' work from various shows, and then I'd analyze it from my own point of view. I'm very particular. I'm very opinionated. There's very few things that I like. So
how did you select the artists? Some were local, weren't they?
Some were local. Edwina Sands was one of the local artists. Peggy Greenfield, really one of the more talented artists.
Yes.
In our community. But I also had Dale Chihuly, I had Louise Bourgeois, I had Jim Rosenquist, I had Chamberlain, I had Kenneth Nolan. I had this wonderful mix.
Yes.
But I wanted the old and the new, and there wasn't, a certain benchmark. It's just that whether I was interested or not. And I think Peggy is the best example because she was doing ceramics, very interesting, sort of these applique decals on hands that I found very interesting, and it didn't matter to me. You're right in the book with everyone else, and that's the way to do it. But I think, for me, even to this day, the works of art that I decide to go after, age doesn't matter or reputation, as long as it does something to me that excites my visual senses, and I'm able to try to articulate what it is. I do a lot of graduate seminars. You go into a thing and you talk to an artist, and they said, "What's your art about?" And the guy says, "Well, what you see is what you get." And I say, "Bullshit." Bullshit. You got to be able to talk about what you do. Okay? So little by little, I was able to talk about what I do, and then also examine what other artists did as well. I went to Jerusalem with Paul Fisher to review the Chihuly at the Citadel. We've been to Dubai. We've been here.
Speaking of Chihuly, you have other books that we want to hear about.
And if I don't stop talking, you'll never hear about them, I guess so.
One was the bunnies, and then we get to Chihuly.
Oh, okay. So I visit Dale several times a year, and maybe
but first we have the bunnies.
Oh, we have the bunnies. All right. So see, I've got to have a mirror here, and I can say, and how would you know that?
I love the bunnies.
The Bunnies is a great book, and I represented Hunt Slonim. I gave him his first show in Palm Beach. He uses bunnies as a warm-up exercise in the morning, where he has an assistant paint maybe 20 masonite boards, and then he starts making these wonderful abstract expressionist with a narrative context of bunnies. And he came to me and he said, I've got this great publisher, will you do it? And I'm interviewing a few people. And he said, what would be your first line on my book on bunnies? And I said, well, and I'm good on titles. I said, Hunt, how's this? Hunt Slonim has found a new perspective on hip-hop culture. And that sold the book, and 2 years later I did it. So.
And now
the second book.
Chihuly.
Oh, we have a pile here. This is. I'm not in the book business, but I really enjoy. Putting this all together. The Chihuly book was done by Harry Abrams. It had a 40-page contract attached to it. It was very complicated, and the word counts and so on. So I went to Dale, and I said, I got up very early this morning. I'm walking around. No one's ever going to know about this. And he said, I never really wanted to share it. And I said, well, if you ever do, I'm the man, because you and he was the one who introduced me to flea markets. So lo and behold, we ended up approaching Harry Abrams. They liked the idea. It's Dale Chihuly, not on his glass, but the thousands and thousands and thousands of objects that he collects that were a great inspiration both to Claudia and I and everybody around him. So that was called The Artist Collects.
So speaking of collections, I was fortunate enough to visit your beautiful home and meet your lovely wife, Claudia.
Oh, thank you.
And see your delightful collection of collections. Now, they're all so unique, yet they complement each other. Can you describe them a little bit for us?
Yes. Although I've forgotten one thing in my notes here, and that's that I want to plug Peggy Greenfield's show coming up on this Friday, January the 11th, at White Space. One of the great spots here. I like to plug my friends.
That's beautiful.
We moved to Lake Worth in this sort of mid-century modern house. When you live downtown, and we've lived downtown for 25 years, there's no such thing as a double garage, and Claudia is a garden designer and architect. So she said, I'd really like to have a double garage. And while we're at it, could we have a pool? And what about? So we've looked around and we found this spacious house in College Park. And here's some of the collections. One of the things that we collect that are very hard to find are these chalk figures that are on the coffee table there. These figures were made in the 1920s and 1930s by carnies. If you throw the ball and you hit the bell, and you get this prize, usually absolutely worthless. But in these cases, these were plaster molds. And when they ran out, they would go out around the trailer, fill the thing with plaster in the little mold, and then they would spray paint them. So they were like little, sort of pre-pop art kinds of things. We like to collect objects that are, there's Claudia's shrine back there. We've always been attracted to religious iconology from 17th and 18th century, where you could find it, and it just has to be a flea market or something where you're looking at something that is really very beautiful, but is not really that expensive. You can have a beautiful collection without spending a fortune. The big head was also in a carnival, and you put this over your head, and there's a screen over the mouth so you can walk around and say hello to people, I guess, at the carnival. In our kitchen, everything is about the kitchen, and one of our favorite things that it's extremely hard to find are these children's stoves, which of course relate to the kitchen, in 1920. And the funny thing about them, they all have electric cords. So some 3-year-olds say, okay, I'm ready to make the cake now. Plug in their electricity and put your hand in there for that. So we never thought that was so bizarre. So immediately, when Claudia and I are lucky enough to find one of these, we clip off. We don't care. We could care less about that. In my Bakelite radio collection as well, we never cared. I never even turned one on. I just liked the way it looked. So anyway, that's our house. How are we doing so far?
We're doing good, but we have to move it along.
We do, okay.
Okay, so briefly, you've been awarded many prizes. Which 2 were the most moving? Briefly now.
Just 2?
Just 2.
Well, certainly being inducted into the Artists Hall of Fame was a lifetime thing. And
yeah.
Paul Fisher had nominated me, and without me knowing it, Bonnie Clearwater had nominated me for that. And we put the papers together, and I said, well, this will never happen because, the Artists Hall of Fame, and Rauschenberg and Rosenquist and Tennessee Williams and Ernest Hemingway and all these amazing people. And so one day I was actually looking through the mail, which I normally don't do. Susan or Karen will do that for me. And I'm looking and I'm passing, and I said, well, this is a solicitation in here in the Secretary of State. I wonder what they want money for. How would I flip like that? I'm saying, wait a minute, Secretary of State, it's not a label. Let's go back and look at that. So I opened the envelope and said, dear Mr. Helander, congratulations. You've been inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame. Please let us know in 30 days if you accept this or not. And I was about to toss it out. So I think that every artist likes recognition. This was a top of the hill for me. Getting the key to the city of West Palm Beach was pretty nice, and the Cultural Council grant was
indeed.
So these were all been very helpful.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
And they're in many ways sort of motivating and makes you work even harder. And so that's the way I feel about those.
Yeah, and you work very hard as a writer and a critic. And in those positions, you get to interview a lot of celebrities and notables. So I want to know, and we all want to know, who gave you the most interesting interviews?
Most interesting interview was Tom Wolfe on his book, Back to Blood. In fact, in the video documentary, I have a cameo appearance in that. There he is. Bernie Taupin, who is Elton John's lyricist and also a painter. Extremely interesting guy. But what's interesting in interviewing these folks is that they're already articulate. They're already successful. So there's an interaction of questions and the right kind of answers and so on. I do my homework. I mean, anyone that I interview, I literally, read as much as I can about them. I think that was the most challenging. Bob Coachello, a name just, beyond belief in the arts. He was appointed the editor of Interview magazine by Andy Warhol when he was 19 years of age. And he did this for maybe 20 years. And I said to Susan, my God, I'm doing an interview with Bob Coachello. So we bought Andy Warhol's Holy Terror, 600 pages, and another book on Warhol and another book on Bob Coachello. And for 2 weeks, I studied this, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, read all my notes again and went in, because, when you're interviewing the editor of the interview, you've got to be prepared. So that was like...
How about Mr. Wonderful?
Mr. Wonderful. Well, a lot of people don't think he's that wonderful, but he's this is Kevin O'Leary, who is a Shark Tank guy and a big collector of photographs, and he was very articulate. I did interview Robert Rauschenberg, Jim Rosenquist. Dwayne Hansen had nothing to say. virtually nothing to say. John Chamberlain should have been in this picture. This was 5 Floridians at the Helander Gallery. And I said, this is the most famous picture of the century. Where is Chamberlain? They said, we're not going to be able to revive him. He's in his car, but he's out like a light. This is one of my great friends in Palm Beach in New York, baby Jane Holzer. We're in, I think we are in the Nicole Miller show.
Speaking of Nicole Miller.
Yeah. Oh, there's Nicole Miller and Jimmy Buffett and our daughter Camila, who just married Tyler Sargent of the Sargent clan. So I did all of Nicole Miller's, and this is a party at Jane Holzer. She hosted.
Oh, nice.
We did a party, we opened these, as a matter of fact, here's one of Nicole Miller's ties here. And so when they came to me and I said, wouldn't that be fun to have a tie in your collage, out of your collages, and bingo.
Okay, and we also all want to know, what are you presently involved in?
Presently?
Yes, besides this.
I need a list.
Oh, okay.
Well, you mean what's going on? What's?
Well, like your exhibition.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, and now I'm getting this from Mio the magician. I'm sensing. Is there someone here named Victoria? Oh, Victoria. Aha! Could you stand up for a minute? Look at that dress. There it is. Now that's major. They're major magic, ladies and gentlemen. No, my projects are. I continue to paint. Well, how about that? See, you're a star. I've always been interested in fabric. I was interested in fabric in high school. All the other guys who were going into shop to make ashtrays, I went to the home ec department and said, I want to be in the home ec department. He said, well, that's for girls. I said, I'm ready. I want to sew. I want to cook. And he said, that's for girls. So I made ashtrays. I did sew my wife's wedding dress out of 122 vintage handkerchiefs, which we still have. It's been in a lot of things. And I still like to cook. And the night before we get up as an early morning, we actually think about the selection of coffees that we're going to grind for the next morning. That's how crazy we are in that. Yes?
Okay, but you also...
Oh.
You also have a foundation that you should announce.
Oh, yes. Well, I will. Several years ago, we got the idea. We came across so many students that we'd give letters of recommendation to get into good schools, good art schools. But they either came from underserved, underprivileged, poverty-stricken, or whatever. So because I was a former admissions officer and assistant director of admission at RISD, I said, Eder, you really need to give back to the community your experience on counseling students. So it took 4 years of paperwork, but we now have the Bruce Helander Foundation that's going to be announced in the spring if we can find a donor for buildings and stuff like that. But even if we have to start out in our backyard, there are so many students in this community talented, but they just don't have a shot because they didn't have the same advantages, and that is what I hope to do. Thank you.
And also, I understand that you're working with Claudia on a project for the Esplanade.
There it is. Claudia, my best friend, and we work together on all kinds of projects, and Claudia also even glues my collages. She was commissioned by the Brazilian court a couple of years ago, Café Baloo, where you walk in there and you see the living wall. Well, that's Claudia's idea. And that went into other kinds of things. And then she got this amazing commission. Took her 6 months to put this together. In fact, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we're installing the last. These are living walls. They're made out of living moss and preserved moss and flowers and stuff like that. And so the entrance to the Esplanade, just across the street here, has 14 of these living walls. Wow. And so we love that collaborative project. In fact, I'm having a show on February the 1st at the Fritz Gallery, Wendy Fritz, and we're going to show a couple of works of Claudia's that we've worked as collaborations. So there are going to be living walls on the thing as well.
Wonderful. Now, for my final question.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of humor in your art.
Yes.
Do you use that humor in your everyday life?
Pretty much, I mean, oftentimes, Claudia and I are up very early in the morning. If she has a crew, we're up at 5. We're up in the dark. So sometimes we laugh because it's so ridiculous that we're up early in the morning. But we do laugh all day long. And we keep a notebook on our bedsides for really funny jokes or things that we've just laughed, because in the morning sometimes you say, what was so funny, you know?
And the showers.
And the shower. Well, every morning I get out of the shower and Claudia points and starts to laugh every single day. And that laughter is uncontrollable and lasts for most of the morning. No, we laugh. We laugh constantly, and we have a good time. And I think, you know, the idea that you find the context of humor in things. I try to put it in my work. I try to put it into what I do. I mean, you know, we have a dinner party. You know, we collect 600 pairs of salt and pepper shakers, for heaven's sake. So everyone's got a funny little salt and pepper shaker. It's fun to laugh. It's fun to go through life doing that. Yeah?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Gary, it's all yours.
Actually, I have to do this one last thing here, Gary. And that is announcing the show at the Fritz Gallery Friday, February the 1st. I'll be doing a lecture at the Palm Beach Yacht Club on January 23rd. The show at the Fritz Gallery is Patterns We Perceive. They're all about patterns of material I found. Rotary Club, if you're a member, Tuesday, February the 5th at 7:45. You really want to get up that early to hear me. Book signing, the Palm Beach Bookstore, Saturday, February 16th. We're curating 3 different museums at the Coral Springs Museum. And one of those is for Jill Kutrick. The other is Hubert Phipps. And actually 2 years from now, we're doing a show for Paul Stanley, the Kiss singer, and my own retrospective in 2020. So our hands are full. For a while, it's all yours. Thank you. You're all invited to come on Friday, February the 1st, to Fritz Gallery.
Thank you very much. Now we have time for a couple of questions. Anybody with any questions from the audience? Yes.
It's not a question, but I'd like Claudia to stand up.
Oh. Yay!
Additional questions from anybody? There's one up here.
Tell us about your work for the 2020 show. What that consists of, and what is your principal passion and interest in your own art now?
Was this the show that I was in which was the 2020 show? What am I? That I'm in? Oh, the Coral Springs. Oh, goodness. It seems like a long way away, doesn't it? But anyway, this will be a collection of works that first of all, we've already started looking into loans by major museums. So there's 2 or 3 great pictures in the Guggenheim and the Whitney. There's something in the Smithsonian. Several pictures of the Los Angeles County Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Art. So those are going to be, you know, pivotal pictures that I have that are in private collections. They're just a lot of trouble to get through the loan procedure. I'm showing a couple of early works, pastels that I did in high school that didn't seem to be much now, but when I look back at them, I'm pleased with that. I'm showing a series of collages over the last 20 years that are thematic. Or, you know, I did the film festival posters for 10 years, so we have the originals. One collector bought all of them quite some time ago. We're going to show some of my favorite collages. A lot of the collages that I've made over the last 15 years have been working with technology. Because for all my life, even though I was showing with Marissa Del Rey on 57th Street, a great gallery, she kept saying, can you make them bigger? Can you make them bigger? And I'd say, you know, collages can only be made. I mean, you can't stretch it out. Otherwise, you're looking all over the place. So now, every single collage that I make is photographed and brought out to Joseph Charles Fine Arts in North Palm Beach, where they print these out on canvas for me, and then I have Valerie around the edge stretch them for me, and then we put them up, and I paint them whenever the extra time I have. So it's going to be a combination of collages, paintings, objects, and hopefully some recent work. I'm very excited about these pattern paintings, You know, I used to represent Robert Zekanich, who invented pattern and decoration. And the idea that you can make art out of material that already has a pattern into it, you'll have to come and see the show, is that we have eliminated a lot of the evidence of how the pattern started. You have this subliminal viewpoint of a pattern, but at the same time it feels like an abstract expressionist picture. So I hope that you all come and see the show. Yes?
You spoke about how hard you work 7 days a week. Has there ever been a period in your life where you were seriously blocked? And if you were, how did you deal with it?
The only time I was seriously blocked where I literally work 7 days a week, and I most of the evenings. Claudia knows I'm off to the studio Saturday morning, or she'll come with me, or Sundays, or whatever. But I've forgotten the question. What? Oh, the block. Yeah. So for the longest time, and I would tell graduate students, I said, you don't have time to think, man. You got to have, if you already spent 6 years in art school, you can't sit down and go, what am I going to do? You're the Tin Man, you better start thinking, buddy. So for me, after making work all my life, I don't have a problem. I get in my studio, I got to get going. I'm making a collage. I got 1 million sheets of paper. I got it together and so on. It's the writing that sometimes you get a block on. There's called writer's block. And sometimes it happens when I've gathered too much information. I did this review on Alex Katz for the Boca Raton Museum, and I liked his work so much. It was a great title, by the way. It's called Cat's Meow. And I found that I had such an overabundance of material that I couldn't get through it. And occasionally, you just can't. I'm doing another article on Barry Blitt, the great New Yorker cover cartoonist, the greatest in the world. And I've had this block for a while. So since I was a friend of Tom Wolfe, and he's a writer, I would go in, and I said, Tom, what do you do? Once in a while, I have such a block. I can't get moving with this writing. What's the answer? He says, pretty simple. I said, what's that? He says, sit down and start to type. So I've listened to that many times where I said, I don't know my first line. I don't know where I'm at. Tom says, sit down and type. So you sit there, and you're in Word document, and you come up with a title, and then you start typing, and then somehow it starts to build. And then you get rid of the writer's block. But if you sit there and say, oh my God, I don't know this, I don't know the angle, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not in front of the computer and you're not ready to type, somehow it continues as a block. I don't have a block on anything else. Susan Hall is very good about saying, Bruce, 2 weeks, this is due. This is due Friday. Get this painting done here. Time to get ready on this show. We got to get these invitations out. So she's got it all kind of figured out for me, but it doesn't do you any good unless you do the work. Claudia and I are really not much for vacations, unless it's a working vacation or we're traveling somewhere. We don't take days off. We like to work all the time. Love you, my darling.
Aww.
Before I ask the final question, let me make a couple of quick announcements. The very next Culture and Cocktails will be Monday, February 4th, right here. It'll be an interview with the real estate developer, film producer, wine connoisseur. He just bought Avenue magazine. He's won Oscars for some of his foreign films. Charles Cohen, part-time Palm Beacher. He will be here, and he'll be talking about his career. At a Culture and Cocktails 4 or 5 years ago, he was speaking with his wife, and he said that he was looking to do a theater in West Palm Beach. And somebody in the audience said, buy the Carefree Theater. So he did. And he's now trying to do this great big renovation project with theaters and apartments and retail on Dixie Highway. It's an amazing guy. He'll be interviewed by Dr. David Brenneman from the Society of the Four Arts. Again, that is on Monday, February 4th. For the final question, Bruce, you are a great artist and a critic. Deborah, you are an art historian. Evaluate one another. What place does each of them have in Palm Beach culture?
Whoa.
Ladies first.
Okay.
Well,
then I'll.
Just wait. I'm evaluating Bruce right now. Not only is he so talented and our own celebrity artist, and he's just an amazing person, he is so generous to other artists and other authors. I've never seen anything like it. He's just so, it's heartwarming, because this is what it's all about, being generous to your fellow artist and author. You're up.
Speaking of being generous, thank you. My goodness.
You're welcome.
My opinion, and I'm when I first came to Florida, I would look for anyone that had any kind of affiliation with culture. Michael Price, what do you do? I'm a photographer. My best friend for a long time. Anyone that came along, architect or whatever. So the idea when I first met Deborah, and I was familiar from these wonderful books that she would write, and that she was also a colleague of mine as an art dealer. Art dealers always make the best historians because they have to do all the research and so on and so forth. So I'd say, one of the qualities that I like most in Deborah, and she's extremely organized, and, even though it's an hour interview, we've probably been working on it for, carefully for over a month or so, maybe longer, exchanging notes and collecting stuff. So it's the idea that Deborah Pollack is the real thing. She knows what she's talking about. She knows a great deal about the art history of this town, better, I think, than anyone that I know of. She's enthusiastic, and I feel like I'm in Trump's cabinet now. And just the greatest thing since top level. No, and so, I can't think of any other things to say that, you just...
That's
I
plenty.
can't say you're greatest in the world, but no. But you're a pleasure to be with, and you're a resource for this community, and the idea that we have such a good writer and that you understand the context of writing and the aesthetics of art is really something. So I salute you for that.
Thank you very much.